Hello, everyone, and welcome to the 30th episode of the Startup Boston podcast, where I interview entrepreneurs, investors, and influencers in the Boston startup community to uncover actionable advice and stories from their experiences. I'm your host, Nick Dupuis. First, a big thank you to Fredson Gomes, co-founder at Render Apps, for introducing me to today's guest. Today's guest is Rob MacLeod, founder of Neoscape. Rob was a full-time carpenter and went to school for architecture before founding Neoscape 21 years ago. Today, Neoscape is a one-stop shop for clients, including real estate developers, architects, designers, and corporations for everything from 3D renderings, imaging, filmmaking, animation, interactive development, and branding and strategy. A few things we talk about in today's episode are virtual reality, including where he sees the field going and how Neoscape's real estate clients are using the technology. Rob was also nice enough to show me some demos of some of the virtual reality projects that they've done with HTC Vive and Samsung Gear, and I was really blown away by it. This stuff is awesome. We also talk about what his hiring process looks like and the characteristics that he looks for. We talk about failures, specifically a quote of his I found where he said, "Failure is necessary for a company and for personal or employee growth," and how he stays excited by the industry after being in it for over 20 years, and how he stays hungry to pursue new technology and techniques. If you like today's episode, be sure to subscribe to the podcast on iTunes so you can get all the new episodes as soon as they're released right on your podcast app. And as always, you can find today's show notes at startupbostonpodcast.com, and you can reach me at nic@startupbostonpodcast.com. Enjoy today's episode. Rob, thank you so much for coming on the show today.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
To get us rolling here, can you tell us a little bit about your background?
Sure. Founded Neoscape 21 years ago, so maybe we're the world's oldest startup. But before that, I went to school for architecture at the University of Colorado. And before that, I was a full-time carpenter. So I kind of came from the trades into architecture and then from there into a more creative and technology-based company.
How did you come to found Neoscape?
While I was in school, one of my classmates was also getting into computer-generated imagery, which, when we were in architecture school, we all kind of got into it a little bit. And my other partners, my brother, we also all worked for the same company after school. So we all worked for a big engineering company doing 3D visualization and animation. And, as we were working for this other company, we wanted to get back into more architectural work and less heavy civil, airports, roadways, tunnels, transit system type work. And so for about a year, we talked about, wouldn't it be great to start our own company focusing more on architecture and real estate development? So Neoscape formed in our heads anyway over about a year-long period where we talked about it a lot.
So what is it that Neoscape does?
Well, we do quite a bit. We're kind of a one-stop shop for our clients who are primarily real estate developers, architects, designers, corporations who have interesting stories to tell. And we started as a 3D company, but now we do everything from 3D rendering, imaging, filmmaking, animation, interactive development, both web, iPad, Android, marketing center stuff. We do a lot of branding and strategy work for the real estate development world as well. And so that's kind of how we've evolved from kind of a pure 3D company into a company that kind of handles all the touch points for real estate.
Which of those services would you say is the most popular?
I think, as the company evolves, we're doing more and more campaign work that allows us to bring all of our disciplines to bear on the project. Our bread and butter is still 3D. Renderings, animations, virtual reality, that kind of work that's all kind of rooted in 3D modeling and rendering. But I see the trend kind of continuing to go into more campaign work, so strategy, positioning, branding, identity, kind of all the collateral associated with that, with 3D and storytelling with film and other mediums being an integral part of that campaign process.
What would you say has been the most difficult part with growing Neoscape?
There have been a lot of difficult parts. From being so closely tied to the real estate industry, we kind of ride those waves, which tend to go in like 7 or 8 year cycles up and down. We started the company our own. We're still a private company, so funding the company, funding expansion, knowing when is the right time to hire more people, for instance, has always been a tricky proposition. Hiring people who are better than us is kind of something we've prided ourselves on, but knowing when to pull the trigger, like when do you have enough work to add 2 or 3 people? And so that's been a really tricky thing. We've been pretty cautious with that. And we try to kind of get the company running at, 100 to 125%. And when that kind of stays consistent, we know, okay, the need is real. So we'll kind of add people. And I think as we've grown the company, we've also got a lot smarter about how to use contractors or partner with other companies as a way to not have to take on the kind of the extra expense of adding employees or bigger office space or what have you. So we found more interesting and kind of adaptable ways to kind of shrink and grow if we need to, but we stay conservative. But hiring is definitely a challenge, finding the right person with the right skill set, somebody who wants to grow with the company, somebody who can not just grow with the company, but wants to lead the company in a new direction has been something that is often hard to find. So finding the best people is always a challenge, I think, for a company of our size.
Mm-hmm. Have you ever, going back to like the cyclical real estate trends, have you ever ventured outside of real estate, or are you to help cope with that, or do you look to mainly stick to real estate?
Well, we did a couple of things to protect ourselves. We got a little wider in terms of service offerings. The things that we produce for clients work across any real estate sector. So often all the sectors don't dip low at the same time. Sometimes they do, like in 2008, 2009. And we have made a conscious effort to add more corporate clients. So, we do a lot of work for people like Autodesk and EMC and other companies like that need to use our expertise. And it's not specifically tied to real estate, but it's still related to our core industry.
Such, and that'll help protect you with the real estate market fluctuations.
Yeah. Yep.
Okay.
I hope it will. As so far.
Yeah. You brought up hiring, so I want to talk about that.
Yeah.
So what does your hiring process look like, and what do you look for in a candidate?
That's a great question. One of the things that, we got advice early on from our parents and other friends. And one of the things that my partner Nils, his father, told us was always hire people who are better than you. And so that's one of the things we look at. And that's a question we ask ourselves while we're interviewing. And after, when we all get together and talk about a candidate, how are we going to be a better company if we hire this person? On day one, are we better? And if so, what are we better at? And what's the potential for that person taking us even further along? So that's something that's really interesting. Sometimes we describe it as like an awesomeness factor, something that is hard to put your finger on. So we're not strict resume hirers. Resumes are great to kind of get your bearings. But it's personality, it's drive, it's somebody's passion. We don't want to hire people who just want a job. We want them to feel like Neoscape offers them something unique, and it's a unique opportunity, and they want to be a part of this company, not just a company. And it's a collective mindset. So, often it's gut feel. I feel like one of the things that I actually do here is I have a good kind of finely tuned gut feel when it comes to hiring, and it's not always right, obviously, but I trust those instincts, and because we often have a lot of qualified candidates, but somebody has to have that something extra that's going to make them really fit and excel here. So that's part of what I feel like I can bring is kind of be that person who has the gut check on the interview process.
How do you measure drive and passion?
It's a lot of my questions don't focus on work when I'm interviewing somebody. I'm asking more questions about what people do in their free time, what motivates them, how they handle personal failures, things that hopefully get to kind of the core of who that person is and what motivates and drives them. And I think it becomes apparent just through normal conversation whether somebody loves what we do or it's just a job. So it's hard to detail it exactly, but I think, I've got a lot of questions that I ask. Some of them I ask everybody, one particular question at the end that is a very good, it's a good way to kind of see how people think on their feet. And it's always been a question that is unexpected for them. And so there's some things like that I use during interviewing that I feel like really get people to be comfortable. Interviewing I know is a really nerve-wracking thing for a prospective employee. So getting them in some ways out of their comfort zone, but that to me gets them into kind of their true comfort zone, when they kind of go off script and just start shooting the shit with people.
What's the one question that you ask?
If you could be any kitchen appliance, what would you be and why? And I expect you to answer that.
Wow, that's a tough one. Let's see, if I were to answer it, I'm going to go with a blender. And my reasoning for that would be, I think the work I do best is like project management type work. And to do that, well, you have to work with a bunch of different teams. And I think that's what the blender does, is it works with a bunch of different ingredients and mixes them together so that they work.
Great. So that's a great answer. That's one of the more popular answers, which is good, but it's a really interesting way to get people to think about themselves in a totally abstract way.
Yeah.
So
interesting. What are some of your favorite client project works that you've done over the last few years?
There's quite a few of them. I think we do a lot of work for Moshe Safdie Architects, and he's based in Somerville, and he's, Starchitect level, so he's done just amazing body of work over the last 50 years. And we do a lot of work with him and his firm, and it's always extremely challenging from a time pressure. The architecture is beautiful. The projects are massive scale often. And so, it's a different kind of mindset for us and our team to get into, because we'll often get, 6 weeks to help them with a competition, and it is fast and furious because they're designing throughout the entire 6 weeks. We're trying to produce materials for them to use to hopefully win the competition, and we're doing pieces and parts of their overall effort. But it's important to have a cohesive team, to have a lot of trust. We've been working with them for probably about 20 years. And so building that trust takes a lot of time, and it's baby steps. So we've built trust, and then we get to do more and more. And it's really rewarding. It's rewarding when they win. It's rewarding when they don't win, because as a team, our firm and their firm, we're building this bond that, they understand they can trust us and they can rely on us to produce great stuff. And so it's really rewarding. It's a tremendous amount of work. And I commend my teams, because they often work all night or weekends to make sure that we deliver the highest quality. So in some ways, it's really arduous, tough work, but the rewards are really great. And I think one thing that it's hard for people to understand when they're in the thick of it is that they're building bonds with their teams that are going to last forever. They've been in the trenches together. They accomplish something great. They learn a lot. They get better at what they do. And at the end of it, hopefully they stand back and say, you know what, that was tough, but it was worth it. And so that's one client that we've done many projects for. So that's more of a client that I'm trumpeting about a little bit, as opposed to just one particular project. Another project that I really love the work we did is something called Mansion on Madison, which we did for Northwood. And it was a really cool retail project in Manhattan on Madison. It was taking this old, beautiful asset and converting it into a retail project. At the end of the day, we produced really beautiful materials for them. They leased the entire thing to the Trunk Club for their first bricks and mortar for a very, very high dollar per square foot. So it was a fantastic deal. And it was kind of a groundbreaking deal for a company like that. So to be in the mix and to try to help our client produce materials for specific tenants and tenant pitches is really fun, because it's a different way of thinking about our work. Mm-hmm. We're more engaged with who the end user might be. So that's a couple of examples.
Did you do the renderings for the Olympic proposal?
We did.
For Boston?
Yeah.
That's what I thought.
Yeah, that was also a really cool project, obviously huge in scope. Looking at all the different venues and looking at all the different districts. I was quite disappointed at the way it turned out in terms of it kind of being pulled. Mm-hmm. But one of the best things about that project, a lot of our work is highly polished, photorealistic, just absolutely beautiful. And a lot of the work that we were asked to do for the Olympics was more about location and accessibility, less about the design of the venues, but more about their location and the legacy impact of those venues on Boston after the Olympics were gone. So it wasn't about super highly polished photorealistic images. It was about telling a story about how the Olympics could transform Boston. So as a storytelling vehicle, we didn't need the highest quality, most polished visuals. We needed a clear story told very concisely with very little architectural detail, because the fact of the matter is none of the venues were designed when Boston was proposing. So it was really interesting to take teams who really focus on quality a lot and in doing beautiful, beautiful work, and getting them to think a little bit differently about how it's not just beautiful work that can create a tremendous impact for an audience. It's about telling the right story with the appropriate level of fit and finish on the images. So that was really cool.
What would you say is the key to creating that photorealistic, beautiful image that you mentioned?
I think a lot of it comes from studying photography. we hope that all of our artists either have or develop an interest in photography. Trying to go out and capture reality with a camera or sketching is really, really difficult to be really good at it. But it helps you become a better renderer because you understand the nuances of how light works and why things look so dynamic through a camera lens. The computer's not really much different. You have all the same settings as shooting things with a practical camera. And just because it's on the computer doesn't mean you should take shortcuts. You should still think about composition. You should still think about set dressing. You should still think about lighting and atmosphere and how to capture what you probably have in your mind's eye. And so that's the trick, is getting people to have a clear vision of what they're trying to produce, using a lot of source and reference imagery to make sure that they have that in a shareable format so they can work with their team on producing, because often we're producing multiple renderings and they're done by a team, so it's not usually one person doing every rendering. But then knowing how to actually use the software to its full extent to get what's in your mind or what's on reference, I think is definitely a trick. It's an art. We study, you probably saw walking in, we have a gallery display from the American Society of Architectural Illustrators up in our lobby area. And we spend a ton of time studying the masters of illustration, throughout the past, architectural illustration has been around for thousands of years. The tools that we're using now haven't been around that long, but it's the same basic concept and principle. It's composition, it's lighting, it's storytelling, it's kind of developing a narrative, even if it's a single still image. So those are the things that I think that really contribute to photorealism and hyperrealism.
Who are some of the people that you study?
Artists like Michael McCann, who's a watercolorist. He's from Toronto. He does amazing work. He's probably done 7,000 or 8,000 architectural renderings himself. Wow. And often on some of the work we do for Softy, he's producing watercolors while we're producing photoreal images and animations. And it's a really good juxtaposition. When we started the company, a lot of people that we were promoting ourselves to thought that we were a replacement for traditional illustration, which isn't really the case. I think they both still have a prominent place in the industry. When you are trying to evoke emotion, often something that's looser and more artistic, like a watercolor or marker rendering, can be the absolute right vehicle to tell part of the story. Coupled with some of the work that we do, it often kind of hits both sides of people's brains, so you can kind of hit them on the emotional side and also tell a more realistic story by juxtaposing that kind of artwork with the work that we do. Michael McCann is a really prominent one. Locally here, a guy named Dennis Elaine is unbelievable. I'm blown away every time I see his artwork. Nicest guy in the world. And again, we've had the pleasure of working on several projects where he's producing imagery and we're producing imagery, and sometimes we're producing imagery together that kind of leverages his strengths and our strengths to produce a hybrid. So it's really, I have a deep appreciation for people who can draw and paint and do things the more traditional way. So when I look at portfolios when I'm interviewing, if somebody's got pure artistic talent, we can teach them the tools. It's just a different paintbrush. My partner Nils always laughs when people call what we do computer-generated images. He said it's like calling a Monet a paintbrush-generated painting. It's not the computer that's doing the hard. Yes, it's doing the computational stuff, but without a good artist, the tools are useless. Yeah. So there's a lot of people. Frank Constantino is another local guy, unbelievable watercolorist, and we've had the pleasure of working with him. He also is gracious enough to come in and critique some of our work. So we'll have the artists pin up work that's in progress and have Frank come in and give them some guidance on composition or lighting or mood. And because he's doing it kind of the hardest way possible by hand, he has a deep appreciation and understanding of the really minute details that make an image either kind of an A plus or maybe it's a B plus. And so it's really great for people who've never known anything but computer rendered stuff to hear from a master like Frank. And so we're lucky to have him nearby, and he can come in and interact with our staff, which is great.
What's the hardest project that you've worked on?
I'll give you two. We're working on one project now, which is technically extremely difficult. We're about 3/4 of the way through. It's going really well, but we're doing a 4K stereo multi-screen projection film for a project in China. Can't say much more about it, but it's really kind of tapped out our technical resources in terms of the render farm and capabilities, plus just figuring out how to actually get it done in a tight time frame was really challenging, but we were able to do that, so we're on track. The other one that was kind of a milestone project for us was back in like 2003. We worked on some films for the Rose Kennedy Greenway. So the surface artery, what's left after they tore down the viaduct and built the parks in Boston. So we did really a public relations piece, but it was a flyover with really good story and narration from the Zakim Bridge through all of the different park parcels all the way down to Chinatown and the South Bay Interchange. And at the time, we were probably a 15-person company, and we were being asked to do a really lengthy animated story about this project, which was the most complicated civil engineering project. It was a $17 billion project by the time it was done. Really, really complicated from a modeling and technical standpoint, but also it was something that allowed us to develop a lot of new techniques, and it was groundbreaking for a city like Boston to ultimately embrace the vision for the Greenway. So it was really technically challenging. A lot of late nights, probably 20 all-nighters went into that over a 3-month period. But at the end of it, we had a great piece of work. We learned a lot, and we were a smarter, better company at the end of it.
When you say technically challenging, what do you mean?
Sometimes it's a lot easier to generate single beautiful rendering. And we've got enough horsepower now, compute power, that if it takes, you can distribute it amongst many machines and you can render it. It might be 60 hours of rendering time, but you distribute it to 10 machines, and in 6 hours, you have a beautiful rendering. But when you're doing animation, that's HD, and you've got to render 10,000 of those images. Then you get into some real kind of math to figure out, okay, we need to get the render time down to 20 minutes a frame to have enough calendar time to render it all out, composite it all together, color correct it, do all the final post and color grading and audio mix down. So it's a much more complicated endeavor. So we usually start and work backwards, develop a pipeline, especially for these more complicated projects. So it's not always as easy as just, send it to the cloud and get it rendered. That's extremely expensive to do that.
Yeah.
It is scalable, so there is that benefit, but we prefer to use our own kind of internal cloud, if you will, to get our rendering done. It's because we have more control over it. So technically challenging in terms of compute power sometimes, or sometimes the challenge is in telling the right story and making sure the story's right before we kind of pull the trigger and get it all rendered out. And sometimes, when it's a competition, we have to wait for the design to be finished. And so we build a pipeline. We do a lot of work with proxies to make sure we've got the animation right, but we don't have the final geometry until literally sometimes days or maybe a week or 2 weeks before we have to deliver a final film or renderings. And so it's really challenging to have a pipeline that can accept changes late in the game, rather seamlessly without being a complete start again from nothing and do all the work over again.
Mm-hmm. So you have to really take render time into account when you're planning your projects and stuff like that.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Does your background in architecture and construction affect how you approach your work today?
I think it does. I tell a lot of people when they ask about my background, because I never pursued being an actual architect. I would have had to go to grad school and go through the licensing. Architecture school in general, I think, was great training for becoming an entrepreneur and running my own company. This company was built on work ethic and in some ways us being really stubborn and not knowing that there are limits. When you're young and you're starting, you don't know that you can't do something. So you just do it. And, if you think too much about it, you might kind of talk yourself out of some things. So architecture school, you had finite timelines. You also learn that you can ruin good work by overworking it. But architecture school was really good. You put in a lot of hours in architecture studio. It's kind of one of those schools and programs that prides itself on weeding people out by being very difficult and time consuming. And starting a company is the same thing. If you're an entrepreneur and you're starting a company, you should be thinking about, at the minimum, 12-hour days to kind of get going. That to me is a commitment that people need to make. Architecture school's kind of a great primer for that, because you do work often through the night. And we have a saying here that some people think is funny, other people don't. There's 24 hours in a day, and then there's all night. So, work hard, work smart, understand what your constraints are, and then once you know what the constraints are, you know how to break them and when to break them or break through them. So, yeah, architecture schools, I think it's great training for anything that you want to kind of put your mind to after.
You said ruin good work by overworking it.
Yeah.
What do you mean?
I wasn't a very good architecture student in terms of, in some ways, my construction background was a huge hindrance because I wanted to understand how to build whatever I was designing, which my professors were constantly saying, look, don't worry about that. The structural guys will figure out how to build it. You just need to do something cool. And, it's a little bit of, construction is great in helping understand the practicality. Architecture school's great for kind of expanding your vision a little bit. And from there, those things both kind of applied well to starting and running a company, but I don't really know any other way to do it. So, I'm very hands-on, very trial and error, very prone to, failure and kind of scrapping things and redoing it. But I often had pretty decent designs, and then, oh man, I still have 12 more hours until my crit. So I'm just going to keep working it. Next thing you know, it becomes muddy and you lose that original vision. It gets worked out. And the same happens with renderings. You can have something that is really, sublime and pristine, and then you just keep wanting to make it better. And with the tools we have, you can kind of zoom down to the sub-pixel level and work things to death. And so, we have a lot of techniques here for getting people even just to stand back from their computer 10 feet. Look at it from 10 feet away. Is it still what you thought it was going to be? Or are you overworking it? It becomes overwrought, too finicky, if a rendering becomes kind of too precious, then you're on the edge of potentially kind of ruining it. So it's a fine line. You can often, when you don't have enough time to do a lot of things, you feel like every second is valuable, so you have to be making the most of it. But there are times when you just take a break, step back, have an honest assessment, or call other people over to say, hey, how does this look? Is it there yet? Is it giving you that wow factor? And sometimes it is, and sometimes it's not, and then maybe you do need to keep working it. But it's one of those things that it's a fine line. I was definitely prone to overworking my design work to the point where it just became kind of So I try to not let that happen here.
Do you think that time constraints help with that?
Yeah, and I think with the experience we have, helping people make decisions, being decisive really helps when you're under the gun time-wise. Knowing that you need to make decisions and you can't waffle and you can't hedge is really important. So being decisive, even if it ends up being the wrong decision, is better than being paralyzed by not making a decision. So I think time pressure definitely is helpful when you've got the right people. When you've got a decisive team, and through experience they become more and more decisive. They know what's going to work, and so they can, when they're faced with a challenge, they say, look, this is what we need to do, here's what we're doing. And that is really, really very helpful. Because again, when you're in the weeds, you get a little myopic. And so having other people around you that can coach you out of that or give you advice or help you make that decision is really important.
You brought up failure before, so I want to talk a little bit about that. So I have a quote from an article I read where you said failure is necessary for a company and for personal or employee growth.
Yep.
So what do you consider to be some of your personal and professional failures, and what did you learn from them?
There are many failures. I'll focus on a couple. Some of them we touched on earlier. Early on, we had some failures in kind of determining who our clients should be. When we started the company, we thought, oh man, we're starting our company in Cambridge because there's lots of architects there. And we went to architecture school, and architects are going to be the ones who really understand the value of what we do. And they certainly do understand the value. But at that time, when what we were doing was so new, they didn't understand the value as much as, say, real estate developers did, because developers are looking at a project from, say, 30,000 feet up. And so one of our early failures was thinking our client base was one group when it really should have been another group. And so that held us back. Ultimately we figured it out. It took us a couple of years, and we made great progress during those first couple of years. But I think had we identified a better, more substantial client base who understood the value proposition better, we would have been a little better off back then. We made some other blunders in trying to get into areas that weren't really right for us, weren't authentic to who we were as a company. One, we didn't really venture out and endeavor out and do something that failed so much as get distracted by things. So during the internet bubble of the late 90s, early 2000s, everybody was saying, oh man, you guys have to take your company and make it some kind of internet company. And so we spent a lot of cycles thinking about, well, how would we do that? Does that even apply to us? And it wasn't so much a failure as it was a misdirection. We got a little bit caught up and just spent a lot of time thinking about, well, what should we be doing differently than what we're doing now, as opposed to staying true to our vision, which was to focus on the markets we focus on and work on our craft and the artistry of what we do, and don't get caught up in kind of things that are going on that don't really apply to us. A couple of more personal failures are, when you hire somebody and it doesn't work out for whatever reason. I think, often, when I trust my gut and my gut instincts, and when that proves to be wrong, that it stings a little bit, and makes you feel like maybe you're losing your edge. But, the next time you're hiring for that position, maybe you're going to think about it a little bit differently. And kind of the biggest failure, I'll say, was, during the financial collapse of 2008, 2009, we had a substantial workforce reduction. We were about 65 people and we laid off 30 people. And so that to me is a failure to understand, we had our best year to date. We had our best year ever in 2008. And it was probably 50% better than 2007. So we were busier than we'd ever been. And then, even through most of 2009, we were pretty busy. And then the rug kind of got pulled out a little bit later for us than some other companies like us who focus maybe on one particular niche, like say just residential or just commercial office. We did everything. So we were a little insulated. But, having to look people in the eye and lay them off, people that had busted their ass for us for sometimes years, personally very disappointing. And, I look back, that was a huge failure of us to protect the interests, first of Neoscape, the company, and of, the health and welfare of our employees, who are our number one investment. All the money that comes in, a lot of it goes to find the right people and to build the right teams here. A lot of it goes to technology, but the one that I care a lot more about are the people. When you have to have those one-on-one discussions with people. And again, yes, there was stuff going on worldwide that was the impetus for this, but still I feel like we could have better protected ourselves and done more to not have to have such a big reduction. So that was probably the thing that has shaped who Neoscape is now more than anything. We changed the way we think. In some ways, we went back to basics. Let's reinvent who we are. And by reinventing, let's go back to who we started as. And let's sure that first and foremost, we're looking out for the welfare of the company and our employees.
Would you say that you're more careful now because of it?
100%. And we diversified, adding kind of more service offerings that apply outside of just real estate. And we added more corporate clients to kind of not have all of our eggs in one basket. So we've definitely made a lot of improvements.
After being in the industry for now over 20 years, what keeps you excited by it, and how do you stay hungry to pursue the new technology and techniques?
The good thing about what we do is every project is different. Every project has a story that's unique to that project. Although they may, on the surface, be similar, we get to get in there and get our hands dirty and find the best way to tell a particular story through any of the number of tools that we use. So every project, I get excited by architecture. So cool architecture, interesting projects really get me excited. They don't get stale for me. Getting to use new technology is also very exciting, whether it's VR or, things like stereoscopic and 4K, higher resolution, things that are a little more experiential is very, very cool. I tell everybody we're not a tech company. We use technology to do the work that we do, but at the end of the day, it's about, telling great stories any number of ways with the best tools available to us. We love technology, and we're doing a lot of experimentation with VR and augmented reality, and I love that stuff. We've been doing VR since we started the company. So 20 plus years ago, we were doing VR kind of in its lowest form, panoramas that you could, stand in one place and look around and feel what it's like to be in a space. What you didn't have back then were headsets to view it in. So you looked at it on a flat computer screen, which was still cool, but not nearly as immersive as being able to walk around in a space, interact with it with controllers and joysticks. It's truly immersive when you can put any number of headsets on and feel like you're in that space. So that is really cool. In some ways, the thinking about it is not new to us, but it's still very, very exciting. So we've got HoloLens, we've got Oculus Rift, Samsung Gear, HTC Vive, we just got the Google Daydream, we've got a couple of other headsets on order. So it's exciting that, we're going to see this go from kind of its infancy, which is, I think it's still in now, to being an everyday part of our lives, for better or worse, depending on how you feel about it.
How do your clients use it?
I think there are a couple of really great applications. And again, VR is not like a silver bullet, magic bullet that's going to solve everybody's issues and challenges. It's really good for communicating scale. So projects, on the design side of things, a lot of our architect clients are using VR, even internally, without our help, to make sure what they're designing is the right design for their clients. So getting in there and seeing if it feels right. Projects that are really big and spacious, VR is really good for communicating scale. Equally as constraining if you're dealing with a space that's small. So, for instance, a Manhattan apartment that's 600 square feet is probably not the best use for VR. Something that's a little bigger, it's going to give you a sense of scale, I think is a better application. One of the best ways that our clients have used it is, once a building starts getting built, they do a lot of hard hat tours with prospective tenants or buyers. And a lot of buyers can't look at a construction site and see the vision. Mm-hmm. And you could show them a flat rendering, but if you can walk into the lobby of a building that's under construction and put a VR headset on and see that exact perspective transformed into a photoreal experience that you can look around or walk around, very cool, very powerful. And again, I think we're just scratching the surface, but that's one of the best ways. And then in marketing suites, letting people, go for, what used to be called a virtual tour, but letting them really be immersed in it. Lastly, it's very portable, so you can distribute it to multiple devices, multiple headsets. So, a lot of times people making purchasing decisions, especially for residential, if they're in Hong Kong, they're not necessarily coming to Boston or New York City to walk through that condominium or that apartment. So you maybe need a way to share that with them remotely. VR is great for that.
How do you see the technology developing in the future?
I wish I had a crystal ball to see exactly how it's. I think we're going to see. Right now, it's cumbersome. If you're using an HTC Vive, which is a really powerful headset, but right now it's connected, so you're tethered to a workstation, and that limits how people feel about it. It's a little bit awkward if you're in a group to strap this headset on and grab these controllers. If you're not, if that's not your world and you don't game or do other things that use those kind of environments, it's off-putting for people. And again, depending on your demographic, it may or may not be appropriate. So if you're doing, say, an institutional project with, heavy outreach and fundraising, but your target audience is 50, 60, 70 years old, they may not be the most accepting of using that kind of technology to understand what the experience is going to be like. So it might be a piece of it, but it may not be the star of the show. But I think the headsets are going to become like your eyeglasses. They're going to become really slimmed down, provide a really seamless experience. And I think, with the HoloLens and other augmented reality things, people like it to be social. And so if you can see through the headset and interact with your peers, it gives you a level of comfort. Some of them, you can't do that. Of course, right now, what you can do on a HoloLens is, again, just beginning. We see a lot of promise for that. There's a company called MacLeod, which is developing supposedly, just unbelievable augmented reality through some kind of headset. Very little is known about them, except that they've had massive investments in the company. So we're excited to stay tuned for that. But again, we buy everything that becomes commercially available. We do a lot of R&D, and sometimes it's just understanding, is this something that's going to work for our business? Or is it something we just need to understand, and it's going to lead to some other breakthrough? So I think the equipment will get smaller and smaller, less obtrusive, and better quality, higher fidelity. The early, like Oculus Developer Kit 1 was in many ways a terrible experience from an end user. If you put it on, the frame rate was really low, so you'd get motion sick very quickly. That's not something our clients want or that we want for our clients, but with every iteration, it gets better and better. And we need to suffer through that to be developers for these systems. So it just kind of becomes kind of part and parcel with what we're doing is we're going to try kind of bleeding edge stuff, and some of it's going to work great and some of it's not going to work at all. It's still a little cumbersome, because some of the headsets take a workstation class machine to run, really smoothly. But that, again, think about, our phones now are probably as powerful as the computers that we started Neoscape with, probably more powerful. So everything's going to shrink and it's going to become ubiquitous.
I want to move now into our rapid fire questions.
Okay.
So the first question is, what's something about you that most people don't know?
Something about me most people don't know. I run quite a few of those obstacle races like Tough Mudders and Warrior Dashes and Spartan races.
Okay. I
just did the Spartan Fenway 2 weeks ago. There's something about that kind of personal, physical challenge, but with a team aspect that I love doing it. I found it to be a really great way to build team within Neoscape because I'm often running with coworkers. So I've done maybe 6 Tough Mudders, 3 or 4 Spartans, 3 or 4 Warrior Dashes, and a few other assorted races. And they're just kind of fun distractions for me, but I like them.
What advice would you give your 25-year-old self?
My 25-year-old self probably doesn't need much advice from me now because one of the things I've realized is that, knowing what I know now, I might have been too timid or too afraid to start Neoscape. Back then, I didn't know anything about anything. So we were kind of blindly just, hey, we have this idea, let's do it. And we didn't think that much about it. We just figured we could work our way through any challenge. I would say, I guess in hindsight, develop a vision, develop a story and stick to it and use that as a guidepost. We did learn, a few years in that we should write a business plan every year or two, not so we can check it every day to see how we're doing, but as more of a historical document. Hey, let's really think about where we want to go. And when, I was 28 when we started the company. My partners were 24. We had a business plan. It was, a joke by, all standards actually. But, as we got smarter and more experienced, it became a really good exercise for us to actually sit down and map out where we want to be in a year, in 5 years, in 10 years. So I would give my 25-year-old self some advice to take some business courses too, because none of us really had any experience running a business, and it's a lot of the business is kind of running the company, not, doing the work is the fun part of it. Running the business is definitely more challenging, difficult side of it. So I would probably take a few business classes.
Outside of work, what do you look forward to the most?
Definitely 100% family time. So I've got 2 little boys, a 4-year-old and a 7-year-old. So time with them at home is gold. That's what I look forward to. Weekends, time with them, their sports, activities, just hanging out, whatever we're doing, and getting the whole family to participate in whatever it is, to me is the best use of my non-work time.
What are some of your favorite tools that help make your life and work easier?
In some ways, I'm still kind of analog. I use Google, Sheets and Docs and all that stuff, and that is a godsend to maintain a busy schedule. We use a tool for project management called MavenLink, which has been really, really good for us to analyze projects, to look at metrics, on an up to the minute basis. How are we performing? How are we doing? What's harder than we thought? What's easier than we thought? What's our manpower projections look like so that we know whether we can take on additional work. So tools like that, I think, are really critical to helping our company perform. And then, I'm also the first guy to pull out a whiteboard and put a persistent list of goals so it's in front of me on a daily basis, that constant reminder of here's what you need to do, so do it. And so it's a blend of kind of digital tools and, kind of more fundamental analog stuff.
What are some of your favorite blogs or books?
There's some guys I know in Cambridge that run Soldier Design, and Bobby Riley, the guy that runs it, he's got a great blog associated with their website that I really find insightful, and so I read that quite a bit. I read lots of management books. So whether it's, From Good to Great, books like that are just a different look on whether it's, kind of running your company like a tribe or, kind of identifying what's keeping your company from getting to that next level. I read lots of books like that. I also, I love Wired and other kind of light reading that has a technology bent to it.
Yeah. And
then for, I guess, leisure, I read a lot of crime and thriller type books that just kind of lets me escape from reality for a little bit. And that's how I spend a little bit of my downtime as well.
What are some of your favorite business books that you think maybe have helped you the most?
I think the one I mentioned, From Good to Great, is really, very eye-opening for me. And I think it was, I'm always reading, and I'm really bad at remembering their names, the titles of the books, but that one, I've probably read it 2 or 3 times because I always get something new out of it. And it's a book that I share with a lot of my managers to help them kind of take a different look at what their role is. And even books as simple as, 1 Minute Manager. You can get something really good out of that when you don't have a background in management. So that's another book that, even when my employees say, I don't read, I don't like to read, well, anybody can read that kind of book. So, and we share a lot of, just industry articles. We also heavily promote kind of our industry. So we're very active in the industry of architectural visualization and branding. And so we host events. We get together every couple of years with the other owners of studios like ours. And we usually get together in Boston or New York or Miami. And a lot of it's just kind of telling war stories and helping each other kind of not fall into the same pitfalls that maybe some of us have fallen into. So I think there's a lot of movement in that direction. Our industry is still pretty young. It's not like photography or writing or other industries that have been around forever. So we're very active in those things too. And I think, learning firsthand is a great way. Books are great to give you some perspective or other perspectives, and then trying to apply what you learned on a daily basis, I think is what we try to do here.
Just a few final questions here to close out.
Yeah.
So the first one is, where can people find out more about Neoscape?
Well, you can, we're on all the social channels, neoscape.com. You can kind of see an overview of the company, see some of our latest work. We've got a Facebook page, just go to Facebook and it's /Neoscape. And then Twitter, we're at Neoscape Inc. Instagram is also at Neoscape Inc. We've done some really good work. My marketing team, Sarah, Emily, and Kate, are really good at social promotion. We've been doing these social takeovers where different employees take over for 3 or 4 days and they get to do whatever they want, on our social channels, which has been really, social it's really hard to maintain and to keep it fresh. And, if you don't have a dedicated team that all they do is social. So we've been spreading it around and getting just really great results from letting people put a more personal spin on the Neoscape feeds. So that's been a lot of fun.
Do you have any parting thoughts, advice, or suggestions for the audience?
Yeah, if you're interested in a startup, I just want people to understand that it is the most rewarding and frustrating endeavor you'll probably undertake. Be prepared to work hard. Don't take no for an answer. Don't take failures at face value. Learn something, acknowledge the failure, and move past it. Don't dwell on it. It's not going to help you to dwell. Take something positive out of it. Move on. Invest in your partners, partnerships, employees, people that are going to help you grow your company. Give them more responsibility than they're probably ready for, and sit back and guide them and pick them up when they fail. I think it's worked for Neoscape. It won't probably work for our exact style, won't work for everybody, but be stubborn, be impassioned, work hard. And I follow one other blog that I like that I didn't mention is Gary Vaynerchuk from Vaynerchuk Media. He's got such a blunt take on everything. And one of the things that he says that resonates with me is, look, ideas are a dime a dozen. People who can execute on those ideas, that's where the difference gets made. And so, having a great idea is only part of it. Figure out how to execute your idea. And that idea could be something we're trying to do at Neoscape, or something where somebody's going to actually do something more substantive that might change the world. Execution is key. Have a plan to execute.
Rob, thank you so much for coming on today. It's been a pleasure.
Nick, my pleasure. Thank you very much.
If you liked today's episode, be sure to subscribe to the podcast on iTunes. You'll get all my new episodes as soon as they're released right on your podcast app. And if you really liked today's episode, it would mean a lot to me if you could write a review of the podcast as well. Just go to startupbostonpodcast.com/iTunes. And remember, you can find all show notes with links at startupbostonpodcast.com. Until next time, if you have any feedback, ideas for guests, or just want to say hi, you can reach me at nic@startupbostonpodcast.com or reach out on Twitter at startupbosscast. That's startup BOS cast. Cheers.